Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Making good on their promise, this week ASR have released this, version 1.0 of the 2004 Ferrari F2004 for Assetto Corsa. The guys over at ASR have had this car in gestation for the better part of the last year and a half. The F2004, in closed betas available to anybody for a nominal donation sum, has been released in various guises over that time. However, as promised, ASR have finally given us the final version, version 1.0, for free of the Ferrari F2004. This car is one that needs absolutely no introduction. If you are a Formula One fan, you know what this car is. This is the machine that gave Michael Schumacher his 7th and final Drivers' World Championship, firmly cementing his reputation and his legacy of being, technically speaking, when we talk about wins and we talk about championships, the most successful Grand Prix driver of all time. This also is one of the most successful Formula One cars of all time, given its history and racing pedigree. The F2004, as I said, it is an absolute legend. There is no storyline, no superlative, nothing at all that I can render to all of you that would be sufficient to fully explain this car's significance and this car's provenance. However, now, all of us, for free, have the opportunity to experience this car for ourselves in Assetto Corsa. The F2004, as I mentioned, it has a storied race provenance. Its performances over the really 2 seasons in which it was competing in Formula One, at least partially, is pretty spectacular. There are few racing cars ever produced that have the pedigree of the Ferrari F2004. Most of the other ones that can even compete or even somewhat surpass the F2004 are also other Ferrari Formula One cars. So we are talking about a very exclusive club in terms of its racing pedigree. Over the course of the 20 races in which it was entered over the 2004 and the first 2 races of the 2005 World Championship, the Ferrari F2004 won 15 of them. It scored 30 podium positions. Remember, Ferrari entered 2 cars in each race. Scored 12 pole positions and holds 14 fastest laps for the 2004 and 2005 seasons. The Ferrari F2004 was so good, it was so fast, and we'll get into why it was so good and so fast a little bit later on. However, it still holds some current Formula One lap records, all the way up now to today in 2017. The Ferrari F2004 still holds a number of lap records, including at circuits where Formula One still races to this day. That's how quick this car was. That's why, one of the reasons anyway, why it is so incredibly legendary and so wonderfully admired by so many tifosi all around the world. Getting into the technical specifications on the F2004, it was designed by the legendary Ferrari brain trust of the era, Ross Brawn as technical director and Rory Byrne as the chief designer. Rory Byrne recently starting to reunite himself with Ferrari in the design department. The SF70H, Ferrari's 2017 Formula One car, definitely bears a lot of Rory Byrne traits, and it's probably no secret and no surprise then that Ferrari have returned firmly to the front of the field in Formula One in 2017 with that Rory Byrne brain trust on hand. Additionally, the F2004, technically speaking, the chassis is, of course, as you would expect from a mid-2000s Formula One car. It's a molded carbon fiber and honeycomb composite structure. Lots and lots of carbon fiber going into the construction of this car. Essentially everything other than the engine and gearbox and exhaust and wheels, things like that. Essentially everything else on the car is some flavor of carbon fiber. Connecting the car to the road, the suspension system, we have independent suspension, of course, on all 4 corners as you would be expecting. Push rod activated torsion springs on all 4 corners, front and rear. Formula One design trends of the era, push rod was the way to go. In the late 80s and early 90s, teams started to experiment with pull rod suspensions, both on the front and rear. In the early 90s, these arrangements were seen mostly on the rear. However, by the time the mid to late 90s roll around, and certainly this carried over into the mid 2000s, as we can see, push rod was deemed the way to go. Later on, at the end of the 2000s, beginning in the 2010s, basically, starting in the 2010 season, teams started to experiment again with that pull rod layout. Ferrari, in particular, had a whole sequence of pull rod only Formula One cars, and the performance really wasn't there. However, teams have resurrected the idea of using pull rod on the rear suspension, unlike what we see here on the F2004. And all of the 2017 Formula One cars right now using that pull rod rear suspension. However, back in 2004, push rod was certainly the way to go. Other specifications on the F2004, the length is 4,545 millimeters or 179 inches for those of you who are so inclined. Width is 1,796 millimeters or 71 inches. The height is 959 millimeters or 38 inches. So that just gives you the sense of the proportions of this car. These Formula One cars, for those of you who have never been fortunate enough to see one in the flesh in real life, particularly to get up close and to stand next to it and touch it and things like that, these Formula One cars are tiny. They really are tiny. It's difficult to get a sense of scale when you see them on television, but trust me, I've stood next to a Ferrari F2002, and one of the first things that struck me about it was how small these things really are. It certainly lends itself to being very agile, as we all know Formula One cars are. In the back of the Ferrari F2004, providing power for us is the Ferrari Type 053 3-liter V10 engine. 3,000 cc's displacement, 183 cubic inches for those of you who like old money. 10 cylinders, obviously, at a 90-degree bank angle, 2 banks of 5 cylinders each, making that V10 engine. It's naturally aspirated, of course. It's mid-mounted right behind the fuel tank, behind the cockpit, and of course, it provides its power through a 7-speed semi-automatic plus reverse paddle shift gearbox via rear drive layout. So, rear wheels are driven on this thing, as of course you all know. No four-wheel drive systems in Formula One. That gearbox, as I mentioned, it's a semi-automatic sequential setup with a limited slip differential, 7-speed unit, as was pretty much ubiquitous in this era of Formula One. I believe only 2 teams were still running 6-speed gearboxes in 2004. They would be Minardi and Renault, still the holdouts for the 6-speed units. Williams, trying to remember if Williams ran a 6-speed unit all the way up into 2005. They might have. Which would mean they ran a 6-speed unit in 2004 as well. Renault also ran a 6-speed unit in 2005, as did Minardi, but most of the teams by 2004 had migrated to the 7-speed units. That gearbox, however, it had to have a lot of gears and it had to have a lot of reliability because the amount of power it was producing and transmitting to the rear wheels was absolutely enormous. The power output on this car, we still can't get 100% nailed down figures simply because of the nature of the beast, because this car was so top secret when it was racing, but anywhere between 880 and 950 horsepower coming out of that 3-liter V10 engine, that Type 053 unit from Ferrari. 950 horsepower in a car that weighs only 605 kilograms or 1,334 pounds in old money. That is the level of performance that you've got in this car. That is why it still, to this day, holds so many lap records. Of course, you've got to get all that performance under control on occasion, and therefore you need some brakes. Big brakes on this car. They are all carbon disc brakes. They're provided by Brembo, as you might expect, being Ferrari's exclusive supplier in the era. Big carbon ceramic rotors and pads on this car. They can get this thing stopped in literally the blink of an eye. If you're doing 60 miles an hour in this car and you slam on the brakes, you'll be stopped before you can count to 1. That's the braking performance in this car. Of course, the tires are Bridgestone. They were bespoke to the car in this era. Remember, in 2004, there was a tire war going on in Formula One between Bridgestone and Michelin. Ferrari had been longtime partners with Bridgestone, and Bridgestone developed bespoke tires just for the Ferrari F2004, as they did for any other teams that they supplied in the era. They ride on BBS racing wheels with a 13-inch diameter. Absolutely awesome package in this Ferrari F2004, and of course it won the Drivers' Championship for Michael Schumacher, his 7th and final Drivers' Championship, and it also took home the Constructors' Championship for Ferrari in 2004 as well. I mentioned earlier that the F2004 lived into 2005 as well. It did. It competed in the first 2 rounds of the 2005 season in Australia and Malaysia under the guise of the F2004M. The Ferrari F2005 was not quite ready for the first race in Australia. Therefore, the F2004 was called back into service for those first 2 rounds in 2005. Its best finish was second place in Australia, courtesy of Rubens Barrichello, and Michael Schumacher had a retirement in Australia. However, he recovered to finish 7th in Malaysia, Rubens Barrichello retiring from that race. The F2004 last saw action in the 2005 Malaysian Grand Prix as the Ferrari F2005 made its debut at the 2005 Bahrain Grand Prix. 2005 was not the best year for Ferrari. They were hampered big time by those tire change regulations, meaning that you could not change tires during the Grand Prix. A single set of tires had to get a car through qualifying and the entire Grand Prix distance in that era. The F2004, being part of a generation of cars that really goes back to the F2002, was not designed with that in mind. It was designed with the mindset that basically a Grand Prix could be a series of 2 or maybe even 3 shorter sprints with the pit stop strategies, taking on fuel and tires at each pit stop. Without having the luxury of changing tires, the F2004 and the F2005 later on really fell victim to that, and of course Ferrari were eclipsed entirely by Renault and McLaren in 2005 for that fight for the Constructors and Drivers' World Championships. However, be that as it may, in its era, the Ferrari F2004 was an absolutely unbeatable package, and of course the 15 race wins it took out of the 20 races contested, absolutely a testament to that. However, what have we got here in terms of what ASR have brought us in version 1.0 here in Assetto Corsa? Those of you who have seen my channel before, you've seen my videos before, you know that I absolutely love this car to death, and it has featured in literally scores of my videos over the last year and a half since it has been available in closed beta. However, here in 1.0, we have truly a very refined package. First of all, just the initial things that strike your eye when you look at this car, you see the fit and finish of everything. This car has always looked good in every previous iteration. It's always driven well, and it's always looked the part as well. But this 1.0 version, you can see just how the light is shimmering across the snorkel and cockpits around there as the car just starts to face exactly head on to us. Absolutely wonderful. It glints as if it were made of diamond. Thankfully, though, it's not made of diamond because that would be very heavy. But just the amount of care and attention to detail that ASR have taken in developing this car and really honing this model, it really shows right here in showroom view. I absolutely love it. Not only do you see great reflections of the light, but you also see great optical reflections in that paint. You can see some reflections of the showroom as the car continues to spin around. You see how the shadows fall across the car. Absolutely wonderful. Everything looks entirely crisp and clean. The relative sizes and scaling of everything looks accurate. Everything on this is just 100% laser perfect. I absolutely love it. I can't get enough of just looking at this car at a standstill, let alone driving it, which of course we're going to do a little bit later on. Having a look here at the left side of the car as we continue to rotate, we can zoom in. Have a look at those wheels. I love the geometries in those wheels. You can see that spoked design, and then of course great depth of the wheel nut there. The red wheel nuts on this side, and there are blue ones on the right side of the car, just so the mechanics can tell the direction of the wheel nut threads. They're threaded in opposite directions on either side of the car, but also you can get in there behind the wheels and you can see the brake discs and the Brembo calipers in there. Absolutely wonderful attention to detail, guys. Absolutely love it so very, very much. Looking around the midsection of the car, you can see that barge board treatment that Ferrari were using in this era. A little bit difficult to see the leading edge of those barge boards with the contrast against the white and brightly lit floor, but you can see the serrated edge there on the leading edge of the main barge boards just below the Ferrari Scudetto logo there, and you can see just the geometries with that little vein just conditioning the airflow so it can go into the side pod and the radiator duct there. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful job. An interesting thing to note here about the design of the floor on these 2004 era Formula 1 cars, you can see the leading edge of the floor just rears of the barge board. You can see everything is pretty much flush to the side of the side pod. Nowadays, we see the team starting to play a lot more in this area for aerodynamic gains, but that was not so much the case in 2004. You had more engine power, so aerodynamics, yes, they were very important, but Still, the teams basically were still looking for ways to cut drag, and the more appendages you have sticking out of the car, that's more drag, and that hurts your straight line performance. So even if perhaps your downforce gains aren't what they theoretically could be, you've got the engine power. So even if you're a little slower on the corners, you're going to make up that time, and then plenty more once you get on the power once again with 980 horses under the bonnet. Looking around further down the left side of the car, you can see that sun glint over the side pod there. That's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely love that. You can see the details. You can see the screw heads, the bolt heads here holding on the different elements of the bodywork. These panels which would be removable for running in hot climates like Bahrain, for example. Absolutely wonderful. This car won the first ever Bahrain Grand Prix in the hands of Michael Schumacher in 2004. Surely a lot of these blanking panels would have been removed for that race because, after all, that's in the middle of a desert. See here, moving the rears, you can see the turning vanes and the little scoop sections on the outboard edges of the side pods, just conditioning that airflow over the rear tires. Absolutely wonderful attention to detail here. And you can also see the shut line where the floor starts to interface with the side of the bodywork. Wonderfully rendered indeed. Moving around the rear of the car, you can see the textures on the rear tire. Love all that. And then the rear wing end plate. You can see very simple geometries relative to what we're seeing today. Essentially just a straight flat end plate there, and then a little bit of a protrusion and turn inboard on the very bottom and trailing edge of that end plate. To the rear end section proper, massive, massive, massive diffuser on this thing. You can see how this car is generating its downforce. Lots of underbody aero and also a lot of topside aero with this massive rear wing as well. You can see this beam wing across the bottom, contoured slightly to accommodate the rain light, which is operable, by the way, in the pit lane. But wonderful attention to detail. Looking closer in on the rear suspension, you can see the wishbones and, of course, the push rods going into the bodywork there. And you can also see underneath the bodywork, you can just see, maybe a little bit better on this side, yeah, a little bit. You can see that Ferrari V10. You can see the valve covers there, the Testarossa valve covers, peeking out saying, let's go play. Also, interestingly enough, very nicely modeled, the exhaust primaries coming out of the sides of the engine, going up into that single collector pipe for each bank. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely wonderful. Coming around the shadowed side of the car, a little bit better look at those reflections now. Love how dynamic those reflections are. They look absolutely perfect. Wonderful, wonderful work. Coming around this side, yeah, moving up. There's the cockpit. Yeah, like that cockpit an awful lot. Let's go in, shall we? Flying in over the side, and off we go. In the cockpit, the eye point in here is very, very high. We will not be driving the car from this high up. However, you can see, you can use this slightly higher angle to get a better vantage point of the detail here in the cockpit. See the steering wheel? Steering wheel has been facelifted slightly from the last beta version of the F2004, which was 0.6 beta. The shift lights have been reconfigured now. They have a very nice light bloom effect when they come on as you're going up through the revs and getting ready to change up through the gears. Love all that. And of course, you have a lot of information on the steering wheel itself, which we can't see right now because the car is switched off in showroom view. But once we get out on track, you'll see a whole bunch of information coming up there on that LCD. Moving to either side of the steering wheel, to the left side first, you can see a whole bunch of switches and buttons, which have mostly disappeared now from modern Formula One cars. Pretty much every function a driver will ever need to access is on the steering wheel these days. As you can see, this steering wheel has a lot of bits and bobs, switches and dials and buttons on it, but still not as many as we have today. So that's pretty mind-boggling. Still there on the left-hand side of the bulkhead, you can see a reverse button, an ignition kill, a fire bottle button as well, things of that nature, rain light, in addition to all of that. So still, this era, although these cars were very much digital, basically nothing is analog in these particular generations of cars, but still some actual dash-mounted controls. Over on the right-hand side of the cockpit, you can see that brake bias adjuster. Looks like it adjusts in 4 steps for drivers to get into quick access brake bias presets. Also, you have a brake bias dial where a driver can manually dial in some brake bias. Additionally, moving down, you can see the detail in the seat belts. You can see the weave in the fabric. I love that. And of course, everything goes into that center hub that could be released essentially instantaneously should a driver need to get out of the car in a hurry. Moving around to the side of the cockpit, you can see that seat, which looks to be padded in some Alcantara-like material. Not entirely sure how realistic that is, because that would simply cost more weight on the car, and weight is everything in a race car, so I don't know if these seats would have been padded in something like Alcantara or not. I do know on the bottom, though, not uncommon for teams to cover the bottom, the underside of the seats, in gold. Not because they want to be extravagant, but because gold is one of the best heat reflectors out there. And because the driver is sitting right in front of the fuel tank, which itself is right in front of the engine, the cockpits of these Formula One cars can get very hot on occasion, particularly if you were to have some seal failures going into the engine bay. It could get very, very hot, which would be very uncomfortable for the drivers. Moving up toward topside again, you can see the cockpit surround. Again, wonderful reflections going on there with the light. See the lens flare coming in here as we go directly into that reflected sunlight. Absolutely love it. And then moving around the back side of the headrest, and then looking up toward the air snorkel, and then the T-bar, which carries the onboard camera, which is actually rendered. A little difficult to see perhaps, but toward the extreme right side of that T-bar from our vantage point. It's actually the left side of the T-bar, but the right side from our angle, you can see the camera lens in there. I love that detail. Really shows the craftsmanship that ASR have decided to put into this car. And I don't think anything else would be fitting of the Ferrari F2004. You have to put that level of detail, that level of craftsmanship, because it demonstrates the respect for the history of Formula One that these modders have, and certainly because of the situation that we have all known about for the last couple of years that Michael Schumacher is going through. I think that any car that is going to attempt to be a rendering, a rendition of one of his championship winners, I think it truly has to be as perfect as you can make it. Such is the contribution that Michael Schumacher made to motor racing, and particularly to the history of Formula One. I think Herr Schumacher would be quite proud of the effort that ASR have put together here, and certainly I consider it a privilege for all of us now to be able to have the opportunity to get into this car and drive it for ourselves. Leaving the cockpit here, we'll just have one final look around the car as we can start to spin it up again in showroom view. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful work for ASR on this F2004. Additionally to this livery, there are also some alternate liveries for the car. Here you can see Barrichello's car, so this is number 2. Schumacher, of course, had number 1 in 2004 because he was reigning world champion and he would win the world championship again. Rubens Barrichello has the yellow T-bar and the number 2. Additionally to that, you also have the tobacco livery, so this is Barrichello's alternate tobacco livery, and of course you have Schumacher's alternate tobacco livery as well. So 100% accurate in terms of the liveries available on this car, and I've got to say hats off to ASR for the amount of detail and craftsmanship and truly pride and respect, not only for themselves but for the history of Ferrari and also to the legacy of Michael Schumacher in their work on this car. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant stuff. I cannot commend these guys highly enough. Certainly, if you're not convinced already that you should give this car a chance, go download it. There will be a link in the description. You've got to have a go in this thing. If you've not driven it yet, you are really about to be surprised with the level of performance that this car has got. However, if you're not quite ready to give it a try, you can stick around here because we are going to go to Imola in mere moments and give this car a real workout just to show you what this thing can do now that it's available to all of us in version 1.0. We'll see you at Imola in just a moment.